we need a share of the excise tax on cannabis to help us just pay for our costs. It's not a revenue windfall for us, it's to pay for the actual costs. So the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is suggesting that 1/3 of the excise tax on cannabis go directly to municipalities, and the federal and provincial governments can split the other 2/3 amongst themselves, and that makes a lot of sense.
So when you raise this with the province, what's the reaction?
Well, the province is not the key problem here. The issue is that the federal government, which ultimately is going to impose the excise tax, has not been entirely clear on what they were thinking. Their original plan was, widely shut down in terms of how to share the tax. They've shown in the last few days that they're willing to be flexible on this, so we'll continue to work with them. But ideally, it would be a situation where some of that federal tax money flows directly to the municipality and doesn't have to stop off at the province on the way.
Do you think the cost will change as we actually are in the midst of it for the city?
We actually have
things
looked.
We can't predict.
We've actually looked at one-time plus recurring costs, and the numbers I'm talking about are actually recurring costs that we think would happen every year. So, depending on how big the business is, they could go up or they could go down, but they are going to be permanent costs.
What sorts of costs are part of that 9 to 12 million beyond policing?
I'd love to be able to give you some more specifics. I just don't have them right in front of me, but I can tell you there are things like bylaw inspectors, zoning, building inspections, enforcing the rules around public consumption, and so on. So there's lots of stuff in there.
Will you be ready for July 1st?
We have to be. We don't really have a choice in the matter, so it's our job to be ready, and we'll be ready. But it is a lot of work between now and then.
There was concerns brought up this morning that Stampede is a week after that. Are you worried about Stampede 2018?
Well, look, I worry about everything on this file. Even the fact that Canada Day is the day that it's supposed to go into effect, and that's the day when we have 500,000 people downtown, and police officers are awfully busy. We're going to have to deal with this. But that said, let's not make too much of it, because it'll be an issue for Stampede every year from here on in, and whether it starts in 2018 or 2019 isn't really the point.
But further to Councillor Maglioka's concerns is, I thought that smoking rules basically were going to apply to smoking or vaping cannabis. So if the Stampede says here's a designated smoking area, that's where you can go, not.
That's likely what will happen. We still need to have those conversations. There's one interesting question, which has to do with being able to smoke on patios and balconies. So, for example, if condo boards and landlords are given the power to ban smoking cannabis within their apartment, then do we have to make it legal on the balcony where smoking may not be legal now? So there's these nuances that we have to work through.
There's the issue also, Canada Day, if you've got these big crowds and you've got small children walking through and inhaling.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about secondhand smoke. I'm very concerned about public nuisance on this stuff. Nobody likes the smell. And so the real question is, how do we move to a world where people can responsibly use the product when it's legal, but it doesn't create a huge nuisance or a health risk for others?
Can we talk about Olympics?
No?
Have you heard from the province yet about whether it will support its share of a big corporation?
We've not yet formally heard from the province. We have heard that they are interested in attending the program in Pyeongchang as observers. I would imagine that that's a pretty strong signal that if they want to observe, then they're willing to fund their costs of the bid committee. That said, we've been pretty clear that Council gave a deadline for province and the feds to determine whether they want to participate in the bid committee by the end of January, which is before the Pyeongchang Olympics.
Sorry, I thought it was by the end of the year.
I think it's by the end of January. I think I gave them a little bit of an extension because of the Christmas season.
Okay, so...
Yeah, no, it is definitely by the end of January, and Council would get a report by the end of February if they were not participating.
So if the Deputy Premier and another minister are going to the Olympics, is that not a sign that they're highly interested in this?
It's a pretty good signal, but again, I have not yet had final confirmation that those folks are attending either, but I have heard there is some interest, so...
Are you going?
I hope to be able to go. We have to finalize the council calendar first and make sure that the timing actually works, but I hope to be able to go. The city has been given a number of accreditation passes, and in fact, attending the Olympics as an observer is, I understand, a requirement for bid cities. So if someone has to go, it does make sense for the mayor to be there.
And I know you like going to these events. Is this a personal interest, or are you going
Well,
on behalf
no,
of the city?
actually, it's a bit the opposite. Because if I'm actually there working, I won't be able to do what I like to do, which is hang out with the families of the athletes and hear their stories and watch a lot of speed skating.
The secondary suites notice of motion, those aren't really the names that I guess people would expect to see signed on to that. Can you talk about it? Is this the holy grail? Is this the one? Or is there another fix on the way?
Welcome to the sausage factory, where you get to see the sausage being made. I was particularly pleased to see the names on that notice of motion, because I believe that the first part of that notice of motion, which is about making the suites discretionary in all land use zones, which is by far the most important part, everything else is icing on the cupcake. The most, and I believe that given the names that are on that motion, I believe that's going to pass with a very, very large majority of council. And then we'll have little fights about the icing and whether we want chocolate or blueberry or cherry icing. But if the main part of it passes, that's the most important thing. And given who signed the notice of motion, because there's some folks on there who have not been in favor of reform in the past, that will likely mean that we have a very, very solid majority of council, getting close to unanimous on the first part of that, which is, I think, awesome.
And on the first part, can you just explain in layman's what that would do to the process we have in place now?
Sure. Right now, if you want to build something, there are 3 stages of approval. If you don't have the correct land use zoning, you have to go through land use changes. That costs about $5,000, and right now we've been waiving that fee for secondary suites. It involves coming to city council. Once you have land use, every single land use in the city, so every property in the city has a particular land use, and that land use has a list of permitted uses and discretionary uses. I'm oversimplifying, but essentially if you've got a permitted use, then you just need a building permit and you can go ahead and do it. Sometimes it's a little more complicated. If it's a discretionary use, you generally have to apply for a development permit, and if you get that, you get a building permit and then you can build it. And so by moving secondary suites to a discretionary use in R1 and RC1 land zones, it means you no longer have to go through the land use phase, the cost is far less, and you don't have to go to city council. So you show up, you do it online, or you show up at the 3rd floor at City Hall and say, this is what I want. They go through a checklist and can tell you quite quickly whether you meet the criteria or not. And then you'll be able to move forward without ever going to City Hall. So it's a much faster, much cheaper process. And it takes the decision-making out of council's hands and puts it into the hands of administration where it should be.
With an avenue of appeal, don't you just take the bogging down of council and shift it to SDAB?
That is absolutely a concern. The experience in every other city that has done this, which is every other city, is that the number of appeals that actually get standing at a development appeal board is approaching 0. Because you can't just appeal everything because you want to appeal everything. You actually have to have a reason to appeal it. And if someone meets all of the criteria for discretion, having that appeal heard is tough. And in fact, most people don't. So the number of appeals that are filed in Edmonton, for example, is approaching 0. And the numbers that are heard are even smaller than that.
It's been said that secondary suites take up 20% of council's time. If it does become discretionary and it's moved out of council's hands, what are you going to do with all that extra time?
It is the case. We did the analysis in my office that in 2016, dealing with secondary suites took about 1/5 of council's time, just over 20%. So if we can get that time back, I strongly suspect that there are 9 members of council who will be able to talk enough to fill all that time on the existing items.
Not just corrupt?
Can we talk briefly about the budget submission, just in terms of getting the province
Gosh,
to
this is exciting.
assist with downtown and through the Economic Development Investment Fund? How realistic is it that the province would give back portions of the education tax to support that?
One should always ask. The important thing here is that the province, through the Ministry of Economic Development, Minister Billis, have actually done a very good job of working with Calgary Economic Development on a lot of our outbound work in terms of selling Calgary, in terms of attracting businesses and so on. And we really want them to come to the table on the more strategic work around what we are actually trying to accomplish with the downtown, with our downtown strategy. And there's a number of ways that they can do that, including tax relief, including helping fund the Economic Development Investment Fund, and other projects. So I look forward to seeing what their response is. It's helpful to put the whole kitchen, including the sink, into these budget submissions, but a lot of this work happens offline in individual conversations with those ministries, and I know that's continuing.
Is there a program to renovate buildings like this, or would it be a brand new thing? To convert?
Well, there's a number of programs on, say, energy efficiency, for example. So the question is, can you fold some of those in so that they can help meet our objectives?
Okay.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.